Hello, this is manic.mercurian with a birth chart reading. This reading will be for Thursday, September 20th, 1990 at 10:01 a.m. in Lemgo, Deutschland in Germany. And I'm posting this reading because this person was generous enough to kind of volunteer their reading to be posted publicly. Just know though that if you're getting a reading from me, most of my readings are private. You definitely don't need to have your reading posted publicly. That's totally fine. That's completely voluntary. And this will be useful for anyone who is either learning how to read birth charts and kind of wants to see an example of how it could be done, or if you are kind of thinking about getting a reading from me, if you want a reading just like this. Right now, at the end of March 2024, these readings are only, I believe, $44. So if you are interested in that, definitely check out my website. I will link that above up here somewhere. But you can get a reading just like this for that price. I may change that. I kind of have a bad habit of changing my prices a lot. So, that's about as low as I can go. Definitely check that out if you're interested in getting something like this done. And this example will just kind of give you an example of what I do in a typical birth chart reading. And I think it'll be fun. So, okay, Thursday, September 20th, 1990, 10:01 a.m. in Lemgo, Germany. So this person has Sun in Virgo, Moon in Libra with Libra rising. One last disclaimer, I do use equal houses. I think if you do use a different house system, there really should be no discrepancies or no incorrect information. The way I approach readings isn't so reliant on the house system. It's just not. My philosophy is that the houses kind of blend together, and that's why you can use different house systems and still get a correct answer, if that makes sense. Okay, so Virgo Sun, Gemini Moon, Virgo Sun, Libra Moon, Libra Rising. The first thing I noticed about this chart is that there is a lot of earth and air. And specifically, there's a lot of intellectual energy because we're combining, three inner planetary placements in Virgo, if you can call the sun a planet, with Moon in Libra, Gemini, or I keep saying Gemini. Well, Gemini Mars, and then Libra rising. So this person is gonna have a lot of intellectual energy, a lot of intellectual themes. Virgo and Libra are the signs that are kind of halfway through the zodiac, so to speak. They're right in the middle, and I believe that at that part of the cycle of consciousness, that part of the zodiac, that's where things get the most complex and the most nuanced. That's why Virgo and Libra are so intellectual as well as so sensitive. Both perceive the world with almost too much information, too much detail. So that could be a huge strength as well as a huge challenge for this person. You're going to have to deal with a lot of nuance. Anything that involves like taking a huge amount of information and integrating it and like digesting huge volumes of information, you would be excellent at. You've got that part down. That's definitely no problem for you at all. But on the other hand, I think this can be paralyzing sometimes. Like even the most basic of decisions, you may be very indecisive. It may be very hard for you to decide because you can sit there and be viewing things from every perspective and taking every little piece of information into account. And this makes it so that you can see things this way, you can see things that way. You could argue everything this way or that way. Even if there's an opinion or a perspective that you disagree with, you can still completely see their side to everything. You can still argue for a point that you actually disagree with, if that makes sense. So again, this makes things very complicated. I definitely wouldn't wish that on anyone, but it is something that is a huge strength as well. You're probably a very intelligent person. You've probably learned a lot about different subjects. I can't see which subjects you've learned about. I can't see that for whatever reason. But I would speculate that there are like multiple subjects that you have gone very deep down and really mastered at this point. Part of this like complex nature isn't just because of these placements in Virgo and Libra or Virgo and air signs in general. Part of it is where these placements are in the chart as well, like in the houses relative, like what part of the sky it was. So you were born kind of in the late morning, I guess you could say. You can see that if we get technical, Mercury and Venus are in the 11th house. Sun, depending on what house system you use, Sun is either going to be in the 11th house or 12th house. Moon is definitely in the 12th house though, unless you use whole sign. So with how do I put this? Like, I would view Moon as being in the 12th house, and that's another placement that's going to make things very difficult and also tune you into a more complex way of viewing things. You know, I think it's not a coincidence that you have Moon in 12th house and you're interested in astrology, because how do I put this? Having Moon in the 12th house, whatever is in the 12th house is in the subconscious. It's not really seen, it's not physically present, it's kind of in the ether, so to speak. And as you probably know, Moon represents the emotions, it represents the core part of the personality, it's our instincts and intuition. It's also some of our like deep thinking and goals and things like that. It's the deep part of the personality. So with Moon in the 12th house, growing up, you may have felt like you didn't have emotions, like you didn't have feelings, you didn't have this deeper part of the personality. The truth is that you did. Everyone has that part of themselves. It's just that you couldn't really see it for yourself. The reason why is that either there was probably some very intense trauma for you, or there were some very strong personalities in your life, or maybe both. But whatever it was, it resulted in you feeling like you had to completely dissociate. You had to completely suppress your own feelings, pretend like you didn't have feelings, you know, push it down, push it down. It's kind of like a survival mechanism. It's a coping mechanism. You know, so that may have been very painful, very difficult for you. But basically, you became a master at like, I don't know if I want to say numbing your own emotions. I don't know if that's technically correct. You know, the emotions were still there. It's just that you pushed them like into outer space, so to speak. So the result of this is that, you know, that's where I say growing up, you may have felt like you didn't really have emotions. This makes you a late bloomer because how do I phrase this? Like, it's not so much that I don't want to say that this part of you didn't develop, because it did. It just developed in a way that, you know, trained you to dissociate this part of yourself, or like compartmentalize it, if that makes sense. So what tends to happen over time is that everything that you push down will eventually come back up to the surface. It's like you pushed it underwater. You pushed your feelings underwater, so to speak, and like they will come back up to the surface. They are buoyant, but this can take time. This may have taken well into your late teens or maybe even your 20s. Some people as late as their 30s. But what eventually happens is that everything that you suppress, the emotions, the deep feelings, the deep part of your personality, once it comes up, that can be very exciting and very powerful, because at that part of your life, you have this phase of self discovery where you realize about this self, this whole Libra moon part of yourself, everything represented by the Libra moon may have not seemed to be there. So you may have related a lot more to your Virgo side, you know, being a typical Virgo, very practical, very, you know, strong work ethic and very detailed and all that. This more detached kind of side of you that wants to, you know, explore and like see every perspective and like see different energies and different people. All of that may have taken time to develop. But anyway, the reason why I said it's exciting that, you know, once this process happens where it does develop, is that once that part of yourself does bubble up to the surface, what was subconscious is now conscious. And so that basically means that, you know, you have this unique experience of making your subconscious conscious. You now have this doorway or this window to your own subconscious, your own soul, etc. And that's very powerful, because it gives you the probability of having very deep self-awareness. And with that self-awareness, it's not only can you look very deep within inside yourself and have a very deep understanding of yourself, you can also apply that to other people. You know, you understand that the world is complex and we are all multifaceted. Most people don't care to have such a deep worldview, or, you know, they don't invite that complexity into their lives. You know, I believe that most people have a worldview that's as simple as possible. It's just complex enough to work for them. And so, you know, that's all that they're interested in. So they're not interested in anything that's like stirs the pot. They're not interested in anything weird like astrology or, you know, aliens or things like that. Having moon in the 12th house means that you are very you're open to the actual truth. You're open to the true complexity of everything, of yourself, of the world, of other people. And so this basically means that you're not only very you're probably very self-aware, but you're also very aware of other people. With moon in the 12th house, you're probably much more understanding of other people than they are of you. Okay, other people are not really going to get you, but you understand other people. And like I touched on as well, you may be very open to like conspiracy theories or aliens, astrology, metaphysics, spirituality, things like that. Because again, you're open to the weird side of things. That doesn't turn you off. It may actually intrigue you. So putting that kind of into the mix, it's very interesting because I think one might look at your chart and see the Virgo and the air placements, and assume that you're only like book smart, or you're only interested in learning about like very practical things, and that may be true. But with Moon in the 12th house, I think that you're also open to, how do I put this, like at the end of the day, you want to know that the information that you're coming across is practical. There is a use for it, but at the same time, you may be very open to like much weirder, more complex, mysterious sides to things as well, like occult information, etc. So definitely very interesting. You may also be very open to like people, characters that are very strange, unusual, misunderstood, etc. Because you yourself are misunderstood. You're open to kind of people that are off the wall, etc. There were two other main things that I noticed as soon as I pulled up your chart. One is that you do have a combination of some inner placements being exalted, some being in fall. More specifically, I'm talking about Mercury and Venus right now. You may have other outer planets that are in domicile or debilitated. I'm mostly just focusing on the inner placements right now for this chapter. I didn't mention that for your convenience. I have divided this reading into chapters, so you can use those at your will to like kind of jump around to different topics. But right now, I just want to explore general information, general themes that you're dealing with. So more specifically, I'm talking about Mercury and Venus. Both are in Virgo, but the meaning of this is very different for each one. Mercury is very at home in Virgo. It's both exalted and in domicile there, so very strong. Again, that kind of just reinforces themes that we've already discussed, mainly concerning your intellect. You're probably very intellectual. You're constantly learning. You're constantly analyzing everything, constantly observing. You have many placements in your chart which suggest that. So that is, we can be sure of that. You've got that part down. But with Venus in Virgo, this is very different. Venus is debilitated in Virgo. It's in fall. It's not really happy there, so to speak. It's very challenged, especially early in life. So when it comes to just like accepting things, accepting yourself, when it comes to just accepting love from other people, this may be a much more difficult area for you. And what's interesting is having Libra rising means that Venus is actually the chart ruler. So Venus, on the one hand, Venus is in a powerful position in your chart, since Venus is kind of like the head honcho. Venus rules over the chart, if that makes sense, being the chart ruler. But at the same time, Venus is debilitated in Virgo, and then it's actually ruled by Mercury, which is a final dispositor. So I know I just threw a lot of like technical words at you. I will explain what I mean here. Basically, how do I put this? Like, it's like your chart wants to be focused on pleasure, desire, aesthetics, being very diplomatic with other people. But at the same time, like the way you go about doing all of that is challenged. For you, everything has to make sense. You're constantly running everything through the filters of, is this practical? Does this make sense? Is this, intellectually true? And that it's not that that's wrong necessarily. I think that can put you in a position that, that can make you very humble and very practical, very, no nonsense. It can mean that for your pleasure, your desire, your aesthetics, you want everything to make sense. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just difficult because with Venus and Virgo, I think the way Venus would typically operate is that, Venus is the side of ourselves that, seeks pleasure, seeks desire. It wants to be attractive, and it wants to attract to it what it finds attractive through being attractive itself, if that makes sense. So attraction both ways, attraction, pleasure, desire. But this isn't Mars that we're talking about. Venus is how do I put this? It's almost kind of like a low energy planet. It's feminine, so it would rather use its like intellect or its attractiveness to get what it wants, rather than like physically going out and getting what it wants. So part of that, I think, is Venus typically does well in signs that are just kind of like they kind of just say like, here I am, like I'm deserving of what I find attractive, I'm deserving of what I want just because I want it, pretty much, just because I'm here, and I deserve love just like everyone else. But with Venus and Virgo, you that's not really how Venus and Virgo works. Venus is operating in a strange or unusual way. With Venus and Virgo, you feel like you have to work for love. You feel like you have to work for whatever you desire. And again, that's not necessarily wrong. It just puts you in a position of, you're working maybe harder than you need to for love, or, you don't necessarily have to like do anything, or, you don't, it's not like something that has to be like won or achieved necessarily. Sometimes you can just enjoy pleasure just because it's there and you can, if that makes sense. Sometimes you don't have to do anything for love or do anything for pleasure or desire. So I think this is something that you will learn over time. Maybe you already have learned this, but starting out in life, this may be very difficult because, again, you feel like you have to like work very hard for everything. You feel like love and pleasure have to make sense, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can just be there and you can enjoy it even if it doesn't completely make sense, or even if you don't feel like you've earned it necessarily. um, I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I do think Venus and Virgo is a very admirable placement. It's just conflicted. It's just kind of difficult, if that makes sense. So it's almost like Venus and Mercury are kind of battling out, for rulership of your chart, so to speak. The Venus side of you wants to be just kind of chill and hang out and just enjoy life, but then you've got Mercury, which is pushing you to work harder and see the glass half empty, constantly looking for areas of improvement, constantly learning, etc. So the juxtaposition of these two different energies, I think, can be very difficult, especially early in life. But having this contrast can be very advantageous as well. Combining both of these can make you very um it can be extremely powerful, especially when it comes to like obtaining and digesting a lot of information and then processing it and then using it or dispersing it in a way that is pleasurable to others. So, in other words, like if you were to learn a lot of information and then just like throw it at people in a really like kind of vicious way, like sometimes Virgo can do that. If we were mixing Virgo with like Aries, for example, that could be one side of this. But because we're mixing Virgo with Libra and Virgo with like Venus energy, you could be the most excellent person to like, to phrase your information in a way that makes it, diplomatic. What good is the message if it's not going to be received? You have to kind of meet people halfway. You know, you have to understand where other people are coming from in order for your message to be received, so to speak. So I think that could make you an excellent diplomat, excellent when it comes to having conversations and compromising, and again, maybe dispersing like really heavy information, but in a way that is digestible for others to hear, if that makes sense. So that could be like one positive manifestation of finding a balance, with these very different energies. Okay, and then one other side of that as well, really quick, is that for those that have inner placements, even just having Mercury in exaltation with Venus debilitated like this, having exalted placements makes you part of the mainstream. It makes you kind of a normie, so to speak. Other people like you, they understand you very well. But having Venus, or any placement debilitated, does kind of the opposite. It makes you misunderstood. It makes you more humble. It makes you more of an individual thinker. So the combination of both of these is actually really interesting, especially how the two of them are conjunct and Mercury rules over Venus. The two of them are kind of intertwined. So basically what I'm saying is you have the potential to be both. You can be, one step like one foot in the group, one foot outside of the group, one foot in the box, one foot outside of the box. I think that connection, or that you're almost like a doorway, like a vessel, like a catalyst. I think that is extremely important and extremely valuable for you, to be able to explore the world on both sides. And again, I think that's part of what I was saying earlier, being able to maybe take information that's way outside of the box, really deep information that other people haven't thought about, and then you could be the best person for like bringing it inside, the mainstream, and being able to use it or communicate it in the mainstream as well, to maybe to those that aren't used to getting outside of the box, so to speak. Okay, another position that I noticed that is very interesting to me is you have Jupiter, midheaven, and south node all conjunct around 5 or 6 degrees Leo. So this is a big deal. We're going to talk more about that in two other chapters actually that it kind of spills over into. But generally, I did want to mention this because how do I put this? Like the South Node is often overlooked astrologically, which is really unfortunate because the South Node does have a lot to do with our general personality in multiple ways. Really, having South Node in Leo, especially conjunct Jupiter and the midheaven, um, this is very interesting because we've already established other parts of your chart which are kind of very different from what I'm about to say, if that makes sense. Having these placements in Virgo with Moon in the 12th house, all of this would indicate that you're maybe a very private person, very reserved. You're used to kind of just being on your own. You may be a bit shy or introverted. But having South Node in Leo conjunct Jupiter and the midheaven means that you know how to market yourself. You know how to handle attention. You may actually be very comfortable in very public situations, public places. You know, you may be very comfortable with what else? Handling attention. Um, you know, you may be very well versed when it comes to knowing how to represent yourself in public, knowing how to manage your reputation, etc. So again, this is a very interesting kind of combination, and it almost strengthens what I was talking about earlier. You know, you can be, you can go way off on your own and get like really deep into different rabbit holes and information, but then you can come back and like be a functioning part of society as well. So I almost see you as being like the hermit, but also what's the opposite of the hermit? Someone that is very like, you know, has connections or knows how to socialize, knows how to be with others, have a prominent reputation, etc. Okay, and let me just kind of look around the chart. I think I've said most of what I want to say here. I haven't talked about Mars yet. Mars is in 8th house Gemini, and that, even that is kind of interesting. That just shows that what you're ambitious about will be of an intellectual nature. So in a way, Mars is kind of just strengthening themes that are elsewhere in the chart already. You know, like I said, a lot of intellectual energy in your chart for sure. Um, Eighth house is almost a little bit like 12th house. Eighth house deals with like very deep themes, you know, the subconscious and things like that. It is often said to represent like, you know, shared resources and finances and things like that. So with Mars in 8th house Gemini, you may be very adept when it comes to like managing resources, um, having, you know, managing like your investments, knowing when to rely on other people or organizations, companies, etc. But also with Mars in 8th house Gemini, like I said, you know, a lot of your ambitions and your desires are going to be of an intellectual nature. You're not, um, like typically Mars more has to do with what we want on a very personal, instinctual level. But when you put Mars in a Mercury ruled sign like Gemini, it means that, you know, your desires, your instincts aren't instinctual, if that makes sense. So your instincts are actually still controlled by your intellect. Like even this more what would typically be a more subconscious instinctual part of your personality is actually still very logical, if that makes sense. So your desires, you're very consciously aware of like what you desire, and you know you're constantly checking yourself, is this actually correct, you know, do I actually want this, is this actually best for me? And much of what you desire may be of an intellectual nature. You're wanting ideas, you're wanting information, you're wanting theories, you're wanting good conversation, etc. So very interesting, this combination for you. Let's move on. I'm gonna talk about kind of your karma in this chapter. So we're gonna talk about your past life themes, and then from there we'll talk about, you know, how does that relate to this life? What are the main areas of challenges as well as potential for you? And we'll also talk about your upbringing a little bit. So this is where I go back to the South Node again. So South Node in Leo, conjunct midheaven and Jupiter, all of this adds up to indicate that in a past life, you were someone very prominent. You had some kind of huge reputation. You're either a celebrity, royalty, maybe some kind of CEO. You may have just been very big, like in your town. You know, you may have been like in charge of your tribe or in charge of your town, something like that. I can't see what it was. I can only see the themes. So whatever it was, you were seen as someone who was like very in charge. Like you knew how to handle yourself. You knew how to come across very confident, but also very upbeat. You were seen as someone very optimistic, very jovial, very fun loving. Very charismatic. I think that's a huge keyword here. You were extremely charismatic in a past life, and you can see how much of that kind of spills over into this life. In this life, you are working with other themes as well, but oftentimes there is a little bit of overlap or like a little bit of repetition, because you have such strong experience there, such strong experience, like I said, when it comes to representing yourself, having, a powerful aura, but it's not just being very powerful in like a very strict, serious way. You were powerful in a fun way. Others felt like they could connect with you. You were relatable. You were, like I said, almost kind of like a celebrity, I would say. So coming into this life, you still have that. You can still, you're comfortable with that. Like I said, you can definitely continue that if you'd like. You can go back to, being in charge, having a public reputation, being very prominent at whatever you're doing, gaining a lot of attention. Part of that could be like maybe traveling or working with people of different like backgrounds. All of this would be something that you did in a past life where you're excellent at that in this life as well. You can kind of just talk to anyone. You can leave a good impression with pretty much anyone with these placements. So that is extremely powerful. But this is where we need balance, though. The more that you just stick with that in this life, you're not really going to be happy. I say that, I mean, the South Node indicates that, but also you have these other placements which are completely different. Your chart suggests to me that you're veering in a completely different direction in this life. You still have that history, you still have that comfort zone, so to speak. You still have those traits and those skills. You still have that powerful area, I guess you could say. But at the same time, you've got these other placements which indicate that you're completely going in a different direction. You're wanting to look at things very intellectually and more of a detached kind of way. So this is actually really beautiful because it kind of segues to the North Node. North Node is in fourth house, Aquarius conjunct the IC. It's basically suggesting that in this life, how do I put this? Like, it would be a waste not to utilize those strengths that you have when it comes to having a prominent reputation, but it would also be a waste not to utilize your potential. And the North Node is suggesting that your potential is mostly with like being detached. You may still have a very prominent position in society, still, being very responsible, being a leader, helping others, but the North Node is suggesting that you do these things in a way that's more detached or more behind the scenes. So North Node in fourth house Aquarius, this kind of paints the picture of like the doctor, the inventor, the author, someone who is working on something really major that can help other people, but doing so behind the scenes, doing so from their own home or from some kind of laboratory or garage or backyard, if that makes sense. Also, North Node conjunct the IC suggests, you're excellent when it comes to managing your reputation, your work life, things like that. But can you just kind of come home and chill out and kind of, invest in your family or your living situation? Make that comfortable for you as well. I think with North Node there, it suggests that this may be initially outside of your comfort zone, but it's also an area of huge potential for you. And really, your other placements show that this isn't completely alien or foreign to you. You have other placements which suggest that part of you, much of you does want to be detached and intellectual and maybe kind of work behind the scenes. So I do think that the way your chart is set up, it shows that this isn't going to be super difficult for you. There may be challenges for sure when it comes to managing these two very different sides of your personality. But as far as other charts go, maybe I shouldn't compare charts, but comparing other charts, some people have a much harder time with this. Like for example, if you had Sun and Moon conjunct the South Node in Leo, it would swing you way more toward the public side of your life. It would be much more difficult to be more private. But because you have Virgo placements as well as Moon in 12th house Libra, part of you already feels comfortable kind of being behind the scenes and being the hermit, like I said, being intellectual. So I don't think this is something that you're going to struggle with on a massive level. I think that you can I think it'll be fairly natural for you to kind of balance both realms, both worlds, being this very charismatic public person, but also knowing when to work behind the scenes when it's appropriate as well. And ideally, this is a theme that I keep coming back to in different ways with your chart, is that it's about balance. I think this connection, between, let's say, the inside of the box and being in the box and being outside of the box, I think that's where, the nodal axis kind of highlights this as well. If you can be very private, working on your own, developing something, researching something, working on whatever project or whatever concept you're working on, if you can take that, but then also know when to bring it into the limelight when it's comfortable or when it's appropriate, I think that can be very powerful. And I think, honestly, I think that's one of the best parts of your chart. I think that could be very useful. I'm curious to know, like, I can't see exactly how you're going to do that. That really depends on your own free will. But I think whatever it is could be very exciting for sure. Another interesting thing is that with Saturn is in third house Capricorn and Saturn is retrograde. So that indicates that you may really struggle with structure and discipline, at a younger age, which is kind of interesting because we wouldn't expect that from having Sun in Virgo, Mercury in Virgo, Venus in Virgo, even Moon in 12th house Libra. All of these indicate a person that is very, like, I think we'd be tempted to call you, like, very disciplined. Like, you come across very reserved and, like, very much in control. You're constantly hyper aware of your own being, basically. You're very self-aware or self-conscious, I guess you could say. So I think it may be surprising that Saturn retrograde in Capricorn indicates that although you may come across like a very structured, very disciplined person, at a younger age, you may actually really struggle with discipline. You may actually be kind of rebellious. I think part of you may initially want to conform with your social situation or whatever it is. But over time, there's a part of you that's very rebellious as well. You don't want to conform to tradition. You don't want to conform to rules, regulations, structure, etc. I think part of that is because you are so intellectual. You're so, conscious of everything, overthinking everything. You may initially want to conform to the structure or the tradition, but it's only a matter of time before you find, like, flaws, or, you may find many areas of disagreement with the structure, areas where it may not make sense, or, and that's where this rebelliousness could kind of develop, I think, where, you're not going to want to follow the rules. You're going to want to follow your own logic and your own thinking. So that's another area of a challenge for you, but also potential. Because with Saturn retrograde in Capricorn, although early in life you'll be very rebellious and you won't want to, it may appear that you would be disrespectful or rebellious. You're not taking the structure seriously. You're not taking the tradition seriously. The potential here is that you have the potential of creating your own better structure, or being part of a process of creating a new tradition, a new structure, new rules, new regulations, because that very same part of yourself that is rebellious over the rules, doesn't respect the rules. It's because you can envision, like, a better way of going about it, I think. And this will become increasingly obvious as you get older, as you go through your 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. You have that potential of being a leader, of, like I said, developing or implementing a new structure, new traditions, etc. So very could be very frustrating throughout life, but also very powerful as well, especially later in life. That's typically how Saturn operates. Okay, let's talk about, part of that is social too. I didn't talk about how Saturn is in the third house. So early in life, much of this structure may be kind of socially oriented. This like social structure, unspoken social rules or expectations, all of that you're probably very hyper aware of. And like I said, initially conforming, but then kind of breaking away from that over time, or being rebellious of that over time. Early in life, you may really hate, like, small talk, or, you don't value these things that build relationships. But over time, I think you'll learn kind of why they're there, or kind of learn your own place in all of that, if that makes sense. Um, well, let's talk about your upbringing a little bit. So you have South Node in Leo, but then IC in Aquarius. So that's really interesting. The combination of both of those points to you being a very precocious child, like very ahead of your years, very mature, maybe rebellious, kind of like what we were saying a little bit. You may have felt like you were already grown, like you didn't want to listen to any kind of orders at all. And part of that was true. Like you may have been a very intelligent child. That's what I'm seeing from IC in Aquarius. And then South Node in Leo shows the combination of, this like celebrity that was in a past life. That aura is still very present early in life, if that makes sense. So you may have been like very charismatic as a child, very popular, everyone knew who you were. But then again, like I said, you have this other side of you where you were very intellectual, you're extremely intelligent, extremely book smart. What else? And maybe, very weird or unusual, you're very much an individual, let's put it that way. And that's why you were like revered, but also deep down you may have been misunderstood. You may have felt like you had to constantly put on this show, like everyone was looking at you. You had to be upbeat, you had to be a character, you had to be doing something at all times to like keep the energy, the aura up, if that makes sense. And although that is taxing, that could be very difficult, it's also kind of what trained you in being such a great leader, and having such a prominent reputation and being so charismatic. Much of that came from youth. I mean, really, it came from past lives, I think. But if we're just looking at you in this life, you could probably see how these traits evolved in your upbringing or in your youth. With Moon in the 12th house, that is kind of interesting. It indicates that your mother may have been like a very deep person, very intellectual, maybe. Really, both of your parents may have been intellectual. I'm kind of guessing. I could be wrong. But with Moon in 12th house Libra, it indicates that your mother may have struggled with like mental health issues. Part of that is because she may have been kind of psychic or very intuitive. You yourself, you also have this ability. Moon in the 12th house indicates that you may be very intuitive or very psychic, and that you inherit it from your mother's side of the family. So this may kind of run not just through your mother, but like other people on that side of the family as well. Other family members may be very, very psychic, very intuitive. But I do think that, those of us that are the most intuitive or psychic can often struggle with mental health issues as well. And I think this is pretty obvious. Part of it is just that you're dealing with like more sensitivity, more information, more feeling. That does put more of a weight on a person, I think. But also being more intuitive or psychic makes you more misunderstood. You don't really fit in with everyone else, and that can be difficult as well. So this is a theme that you kind of inherit from your mother's side of the family. Sun and Moon are in very different signs, which would typically indicate that your parents may have not always seen eye to eye. They may have had a lot of differences. They had different opinions, different approaches when it came to raising you. You didn't always know what was expected from you. But that difference, that inconsistency trains you in holding two completely different ideas in your head at the same time. So in other words, like both parents being so different, maybe straight up contradicting at times. You can hold two completely different ideas in your head at the same time. So this trains you in, for one, being able to integrate very abstract or advanced complex ideas and information. It also trains you in empathy, basically, and being able to relate to people from a completely different walk of life from yourself. So basically, like, this is the more difficult path, so to speak, the more difficult the sun moon position is the more difficult one, where it may have been difficult for you to manage that contrast or that difference in your head, but again, there are huge strengths here as well that come from that. Okay, what else could we say from that? Saturn retrograde can often indicate an absent father. I believe about 40% of the population has this, so it's not, super extreme necessarily. And there are, completely different, there are all kinds of different reasons why a parent might be absent, whether they're just working a lot or, something else. But I'm just gonna put that out there just in case that is relevant for you, I guess. Um, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about your career a little bit. Excuse me. Whenever I do these readings, like it gets everything out of me, like any kind of like congestion, or it's really weird. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's just all the talking. Okay, let's talk about your career and your reputation. So I did already touch on this a little bit. It is very interesting to me. South Node, Jupiter, and Midheaven being conjunct. This just shows, like I said earlier in previous chapters, it points to you being, having a very prominent reputation, being a character, knowing how to handle attention, knowing how to be very charismatic. So I definitely think that would be a part of your career, whatever it is. Ideally, though, I would like to see something where it's kind of a mixture, where you may be, having a prominent reputation, using your excellent charisma, but also having a position where you can be on your own at times and like deep within your thoughts, researching things, etc. Basically combining Leo with Aquarius, the nodal axis, which also happens to be your IC midheaven axis. So that's what I'd like to see. And, definitely if we take into account the rest of your placements as well, it's pretty obvious that your strengths, many of your strengths are going to be intellectual in nature. But you also have this combination of, Libra rising is interesting because um, the rising is in the cardinal sign, which indicates that you are a leader. You are projecting your own agenda, so to speak, your own interests. But Libra rising shows that the way that you're doing that is in an intellectual way. You want to assert yourself almost by not asserting yourself. You want to assert yourself in a way that is subtle, a way that, is aligned with the free will of other people, if that makes sense. So I do think Libra rising can actually be excellent for leadership, even though it may not seem that way. Many people with Libra rising can be a bit shy or a bit timid because they're taking so much into account before they act, if that makes sense. It can be kind of an indecisive placement. But at the same time, just that ability to assert yourself in a way that is energetically efficient and intelligent and diplomatic, that's a huge strength as well. So basically, whatever it is, I think you could be really great with information. That's pretty obvious, but also having a great reputation. Bringing very deep information to the masses, so to speak. Or, so okay. So what would that be? I could see you being a great accountant. I know that sounds kind of weird, but like, that would be something where you are deep with information, but then like using that to help someone or bringing that information. I could also see you doing something more spiritual though. Something, what would that be? I don't know. Something where you're explaining advanced concepts. I could see you being a great teacher, for example. That would definitely be something. Great teacher, professor. Basically utilizing this really advanced information, but bringing it to the public, bringing this to people that may not be so familiar with it. What else? I could definitely see you doing something on your own. Leo South Node. Typically with South Node conjunct Jupiter and the midheaven, I would typically think, if we were just looking at that placement, I would think you'd be an entertainer or something with sales or something with performing. But combining that with all your Virgo and Libra placements, I think it has to be something intellectual as well, something informational. So I think teacher or professor would be like the best combination of all of that. But I could see you, you definitely are adaptable. You have a range of things that you could be good at. Most of us do. We all have some kind of range. But yeah, that's the best I can see. I hope that makes sense. One thing I didn't talk about earlier is that, well, I guess I kind of did, but it looks like you have a very intense, very powerful reputation, not just because of Jupiter conjunct the midheaven, but also Mercury and Venus being in the 11th house. You're seen as intelligent. You're seen as diplomatic. Other people notice you, and you can have really excellent relationships with other people. You can be extremely diplomatic. So very powerful stuff. I could see you being very advanced at your career, but exactly what that career is, I can't exactly see. Okay, lastly, let's talk about your relationships, your compatibility. We'll talk about, how I see the ideal relationship playing out for you, as well as, we'll go through all four elements, and I guess by extension, all 12 signs, and kind of talk about what your dynamic is with them. So it is interesting, I do mostly look at Venus, Mars, and the descendant. Venus and Mars are kind of like two different sides of the same coin. Both have to do with what we find attractive and how we go about getting what we find attractive. So they more have to do with the like attraction side of compatibility, which may or may not be aligned with true long-term compatibility, but I do think it's a part of it. Mars in particular more has to do with like sexual attraction and sexual chemistry. Venus is a little bit more important though, because Venus has to do with how we express ourselves romantically and kind of what our experience is romantically as well. But both Venus and Mars are really great indicators for what kind of person you'd be attracted to. So in this chart, for you, Venus is in Virgo, Mars is in Gemini. The commonality there is that both Venus and Mars are ruled over by Mercury. So that is very interesting. It basically means that you are sapiosexual. I don't really like that word, but I always find myself using it in these readings because basically it just means that the intellect is an absolute core part of what you find attractive. So you would be, at least your placement suggests to me that you would be one of those people that you can't just look at a physically attractive person. That's not going to be good enough for you. You're not going to be attracted to them just because they have a pretty face, so to speak, or, they look a certain way. For you, the intellect really, really matters. That's the most important thing. They have to be a deep person. You have to have some kind of deep conversation with them, whether that's you don't necessarily have to agree, but just having someone who has like an interesting perspective, someone who knows a lot of information, who is very intelligent, that's going to be crucial to your attraction, I think. So basically, someone who has a lot of placements in Virgo or Gemini may be very attractive to you. Someone who has Mercury very strong in their chart could be attractive to you as well, because they would encapsulate all of that. They would be intelligent. They would be very deep. You could have very deep, very interesting conversations. You're also going to relate a lot as well because you have so many earth and air placements. Someone else who has a lot of earth and air placements, not only would they be very intellectual, like you can learn from each other. You can have interesting conversations. But also earth and air are the more detached elements. So, you yourself may be a bit emotionally detached. And so coming across someone else who has a lot of earth and air placements, they may also be detached. And so, that commonality may make it easier for the two of you to, maybe easier for communication. You may have similar needs, similar desires, similar way of expressing yourselves, etc. So earth and air definitely are something to consider, especially Virgo or Gemini. Oftentimes it is literally that simple that, the sign where your Venus, especially Venus, Virgo, maybe even more so than Gemini. Um, I think I would go with Virgo more than Gemini because, like I said, Venus is a little bit more important, I think, for compatibility. But with Virgo, having Sun, Venus, and Mercury there, like I said, you're going to relate a lot. Communication may be very straightforward for you. But more on your Venus, Venus and Virgo, like I said, it means that the way you express yourself romantically may be very subtle. You're going to be someone who isn't super flashy. Like, you're not buying some grandiose, like, vacation. Or, maybe you could do that, but more often than not, the way you express yourself romantically is going to be like doing something that's truly in the best interest of the person you're attracted to in the long run. So, so what would that be? So, like, the first thing that comes to mind is like buying vitamins for someone, or like, or maybe making them a very healthy dinner, or I don't know what another example would be. Something that like makes their lifestyle easier or more healthy or something like that. These things aren't like the most grandiose or sexy, ways of showing attraction, but they make sense. They're practical. and they're focused on the long term. So that's kind of how you express yourself romantically. There's nothing wrong with that. It completely makes sense. It's completely practical. It's just that many signs won't understand this. Like many people won't, they're looking for like flowers. They're looking for fireworks, so to speak. So that, certain signs may completely overlook your expressions of attraction. But the signs that would be receptive to this type of thing would definitely be Virgo, or other earth signs, or maybe, intellectual types as well. So, Virgo, Taurus, or Capricorn, I could pretty much always go with the element of Venus, but even more so since you have Sun and Mercury in Virgo. Taurus and Capricorn, like Virgo, these are all earth signs. All of them will be very practical and focused on the long run. So, and they're all more kind of humble, more modest. So all any of these signs would be more receptive to your style of showing attraction and things like that. Virgo is different among these though, because Virgo is more intellectual. So, with Taurus and Capricorn, they may be, like I said, they may have the humility, the groundedness that you may be seeking and that you may be attracted to. But they may not be, depending on the combination, Taurus and Capricorn may not be as intellectual as you are, let's just say. They're very practical, they're very no nonsense, but they come from a place of instinct, more so than like analysis, if that makes sense. Um, so Virgo, I do think would be the most attractive, but Taurus or Capricorn could be interesting as well. Air signs are kind of interesting because I did mention how you have Mars in Gemini. Mars can be a double-edged sword. So the sign of our Mars, on the one hand, it could be very sexy, very sexual. There could be a lot of chemistry, a lot of attraction. This is even more true because you have Moon in Libra. So deep down, you have a lot of air energy. You can be detached, very cerebral. So Gemini would fit that as well. You can have a very deep connection. You can, you're both intellectual. You have a lot in common. That could definitely work. That could be an easy relationship to maintain. But on the other hand, Mars can also make us a bit combative or a bit aggressive, a bit irritable. So Gemini um, there could be a lot of attraction. It could be easy in many regards, but Gemini could also be there may be like tension or like irritability between the two of you as well. Another thing is that because you have Moon in Libra with Mars in Gemini, what I find is that Gemini and Libra, they are very similar. They're both air signs. They're both attuned toward like complexity. They're both known as being indecisive or flaky because they're viewing the world in such a complex way. They can see all angles to everything. So being that way yourself, that may or may not indicate compatibility with others that are also that way, if that makes sense. Because what I typically find is that when you have major placements in Gemini or even more so in Libra, you're typically looking for someone a little bit more strong-willed than yourself. And that's where we get to the Libra rising, the ascendant and descendant axis, which I think is the most important indicator of compatibility. With Libra rising and even Libra moon as well, like I said, you may be with someone who has Libra or Gemini in their charts. They're going to be intellectual. You're going to relate a lot. That could be very interesting. But how do I put this? Like with these air placements, it kind of indicates that you aren't always oriented toward initiation. This can make you a little bit more shy, indecisive, hesitant, etc. And so if you're with someone else who also has these traits, someone else who's like overthinking everything, how is there going to be momentum if both of you are kind of just observing each other and trying to adapt to the other one, because both of you are very adaptable? Gemini and Libra are very adaptable. If both of you have these traits, then how, there's not any momentum to it. So that's where I find that, people with air placements, but specifically Gemini, even more so Libra, usually you're looking for someone who's more decisive, more strong-willed, maybe someone who has like fire in their chart, or maybe like fixed or cardinal signs in their chart. Okay, and this brings me to the ascendant-descendant axis, which I've pretty much explained already. Libra rising shows that, pretty much with any air rising, I find that air risings don't typically want to initiate. They're more adaptable, they're more go with the flow. So that's where if you find someone who more embodies the energy of your descendant. So, in other words, ascendant is in Libra, descendant is in Aries. Ascendant is the eastern horizon, descendant is the western horizon. Ascendant is who you are in the relationship. You are Libra. You are adaptable, intellectual, intelligent. That's what you bring to the relationship. You're the one, like, maybe being very responsible or thinking everything through, doing all the planning and things like that, being very diplomatic. That's who you are in the relationship. But what you attract and what you kind of expect and what you are attracted to is symbolized by your descendant, which is in Aries. So that more symbolizes that the type of person that you would most naturally work with in a partnership is going to be like Aries. They're either going to have a lot of fire in their chart, or they're just going to have traits that are reminiscent of Aries. So someone very independent, someone who views the world in a way that's a little bit more simplistic. This allows them to be more confident, more decisive, more action oriented. Someone who is more of a leader, I guess, or more, like I said, more strong willed. It's not that you don't have a strong personality. You would be stronger in the sense that you are complex, you're intelligent, you're very deep. But the kind of strong-willed energy that I'm talking about is someone who's like strong-willed in an outgoing way, in a very obvious way. So someone fiery, adventurous, spontaneous, impulsive, confident, someone who makes the first move. That's what's going to be really attractive to you. And like I said too, like you would be more of the overthinker. So Aries is going to come along and they're going to make things very simple. They're not going to be afraid to make the first move, and so this will just make it so much easier for both of you that you would be more than happy, judging by your placements. You'd be more than happy to kind of just go along with what Aries is initiating, or the direction that Aries wants to go, if that makes sense. I think that could be really not only refreshing for you, but also really fun. With your heavy air placements as well as even Virgo, I think you can get bored easily. Like I said, you're so basically putting it all together. You're wanting someone deep and intelligent like you are, someone that you can relate to on that level, but also someone who's a little bit more action oriented, a little bit more decisive, because that would just I think that would just kind of click with you. It would simultaneously be someone you can relate to a lot, but also kind of an opposites attract dynamic. And part of this too is that I think with your heavy intellectual energy, you can get bored easily. Like, you can sit here analyzing everything all day and seeing everything this way and that way. What if like someone with a lot of fire in their chart, like Aries, just came along and said, okay, let's do this. Let's go on this adventure. Let's try this. That would be excellent because it's going to give you more experiences, more information to analyze, and it's going to kind of get you out of your shell. So it'll simultaneously push you out of your comfort zone, but also put you in it at the same time, if that makes sense. Like maybe being more physically adventurous rather than just like intellectually focused, I guess you could say. So anyway, definitely Aries is going to check all those boxes. Leo or Sagittarius could be very interesting as well. Leo has a lot in common with Aries. You also have your Jupiter in Leo, so those with Leo placements could be very, very captivating for you. They have pretty much all the advantages that I listed off with Aries. Aries or Leo, they're going to be very adventurous, very impulsive, very outgoing typically. What else? Either Leo or Aries, both of these work famously with Libra. You do have, like I said, you have Libra moon, Libra rising, which is very important to look at for relationships. This is Leo or Aries will clash with your Virgo placements, and that's where I do think you'll need a mixture. Like, no one is just one sign. That's pretty obvious. You're gonna need someone with major fire placements that also has that mercurial component, that also has that earth or air, the Virgo or Gemini, or just a very strong Mercury. Because like let's say they only had a lot of Leo and Aries placements, it could still work, but again, they're going to clash with your Virgo placements. Part of you wants to be very methodical, practical. Part of you wants like constant growth and evolution, constant change, but in a gradual way. You don't want to be too unstable. And Aries and Leo are a lot more adventurous. Part of you may, I'm not sure exactly how comfortable with that you would be. Part of you wants that adventure and is okay with being very outgoing. But part of you wants that stability as well. I think you're a bit conflicted in that area. So that's where you may be, like Aries and Leo may be slightly too impulsive or too outgoing for you. Where they may be like bored or depressed by you, where you may be overwhelmed or stressed out by them, if that makes sense. So I think it would take kind of the right person. If they, like, again, if they have a lot of Aries or Leo placements with a little earth or air sprinkled in, or a heavy Mercury, that's where I think you'd get fireworks. I think that's ultimately what you're looking for, if that makes sense. Depending on the combination, that would indicate that they are a very strong-willed person, but that they're also intellectual and interested in these deep conversations, deep intellect, like you are. Sagittarius is an interesting sign that I haven't talked about yet. It is interesting because, if other people other than you were just one sign, and I had to only recommend one sign for you, I'd probably say Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is the one sign that kind of embodies everything that you're looking for. They're simultaneously fiery, so they're outgoing, impulsive, adventurous, a little bit more decisive, but they're also still mutable. Sagittarius is intellectual, so they can also, have these analytical conversations with you and things like that. So like I said, if I had to go with just one sign, if people were only one sign, I would go with Sagittarius for you. But because people are a mixture, I think what's more likely is that you'll be with someone who has, like I said, again, either Aries or Leo with that intellectual dynamic in their chart as well. And I think both are kind of equally important. So let's just say fire and Mercury. Those are the two important things. Usually I can break it down into signs, but in this case, it's an element and a planet. Fire, a lot of fire in their chart, but also Mercury in their chart. That's what's going to be attractive for you. Okay, so we talked about earth, air, and fire. Only element I haven't talked about is water, and I think this would be a little bit more difficult. You do lack water more so than any other element, I would say. You do have Pluto and Scorpio, which is in the first house. I haven't mentioned that yet. But there's not really much other water in your chart. So whenever we lack an element, we can attract that, because they could balance us, I guess you could say, to some extent. Water signs are going to have this whole other side to the equation that you kind of lack. And so both of you could be very interested in the other one, because together you have this dynamic that is potentially very mutually complementary. And your differences, as long as both of you are in a phase of life where you are more curious or adventurous or open-minded, the two of you may be very attracted to each other because of your differences. It can be so what's the word? Like, we can be kind of swept away with those differences, because someone with a lot of water in their chart will have huge strengths that you lack, and vice versa. You will have huge strengths that they lack. And so you're almost looking at each other like the other person is like, has superpowers or something. So this can be extremely attractive, but it's typically something that's going to be very passionate, and it's going to die out quickly, because, again, those same differences that make the dynamic very exciting and very passionate also make the dynamic more difficult to maintain. Water signs are very emotional. You have a lot of air and intellectual energy in your chart. You are very detached. Water signs are very emotional. So it's going to be very difficult for the two of you to express yourselves, and to, you have different needs. You have different ways of communicating. It would be very difficult. Let's see. I'm looking at the specific water signs, seeing if I have anything more to say. I don't think I do. Like I said, you are also looking for someone very strong-willed. Pisces would definitely not fit that. Pisces is more like, I think you could relate to them, maybe be really great friends, but they're definitely not what you're looking for romantically. You're looking for someone more straightforward, strong-willed. Pisces is more kind of like you, except more emotional. They're more nuanced and seeing everything from multiple sides. Scorpio is a little bit more strong-willed, so that could be attractive. But Scorpio also is emotionally volatile, and they're looking for stability. Really all the water signs to some extent are looking for stability. They may or may not find that with you. I think you may seem very grounded, and so that could give them the stability that they're looking for in that regard. But you are also unpredictable. You are intellectual. You're very deep intellectually, which most water signs won't really understand. They won't be able to kind of see that area. They won't be able to place you emotionally. I think that could make them a bit insecure. So pretty much that's the main thing. Water signs would be very emotional, much more than you. I think that would be a huge difficulty. It could work, but it would take a lot of work, basically. So that's pretty much what I see for your chart. I hope this makes sense or was helpful. I did skip over Pluto. I did want to mention that, whatever planet is in the first house does have a huge influence. It does kind of spill over and characterize our whole personality, our whole outlook, and things like that. And with Pluto being in the first house, that is interesting. So that kind of indicates that you are almost like a Scorpio in some ways. Like you're looking very deep and you're wanting to figure everything out. And again, this is something that is elsewhere in your chart as well. You are this investigator. You're this person that is relentless. Anything that you're curious about, you're gonna obsess over it until you figure it out. So very interesting chart. It almost reminds me of my chart, if I'm being completely honest. Okay, but I hope you found that interesting. Thank you for this request, and thank you again for allowing me to post this publicly. If anyone else is watching, like I said, if you are interested in getting a reading, make sure to check out my website. You can purchase readings directly there, and you can also email me at manic.mercurian@gmail.com. Okay, thanks for watching, and thanks for this reading request. Have a great day.